We're back with Lisa, Andrew, and Rev. Andrew, it's a remarkable journey that we even get to talk to you and have you in these conversations where politics comes up, right? We covered you on the Mueller team. I mean, before that, you were covered. Your lawyering was covered. The Enron case and in other legal situations. But now you cannot be part of these conversations of our live coverage of the trial without covering Trump as a candidate, because Trump as a candidate understands that conviction is lethal with independent voters. It's even coming up for him. It's surfacing in Fox News polls. It's got him raging against Fox News, who he's angry at, I guess, for not cooking their polls. But that's too far down the Earth 2 pipeline for me to really untangle. What is your sense? I mean, the legal system doesn't exist to be a part of our political system, but Trump's constant efforting to sort of shove it through his campaign efforts seems to strain it. What are your thoughts about this?
So I don't mean to sound terribly highfalutin, but I'm going to tell you a story. When I was just starting out as a lawyer, Roger Baldwin, who was one of the leaders of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, gave a speech, and he said, you know, it doesn't matter what you have on the books in terms of statutes and what's in the Constitution if it's not in the hearts of men and women who are citizens, and it's not something that's ingrained in what we believe. And I remember at the time just not understanding. I was like thinking, wait a second, if it's in the Constitution, if we have a statute, it's like that's bedrock. And I think that what he said has just resonated so much with me these days, because, you know, our legal system, you know, has not fared all that well in terms of holding for the first time a president or former president to account. You know, we've seen successes with Judge Merchan, we've seen failures with Judge Cannon and with the Supreme Court of the United States. It's really been a mixed bag. And also, you know, speed is not sort of what the judicial system is known for. As Reverend Al Sharpton knows very, very well. And so I think what the real take home is that you learn that looking to the legal system, it's important, it should be better, it should be fought for, but the real issue is making sure that the roots of the Constitution and statutes and what it means to be American and live in a democracy, those are if we don't internalize those and vote based on those and live those, it doesn't really matter that you have a Judge Merchan and that you have a trial if it's not going to be something that's meaningful to the electorate. And so we sort of, yes, you should still look to the legal system, but it's not ultimately where we need to look. In terms of the future of our country, it's what Trump has revealed is that the roots of that sort of we thought, or at least I had thought, were so deep in this country of constitutional rights and norms are quite shallow.
Yeah, I mean, Rev, this is the thing with Trump, right? I mean, he's such a five-alarm fire, that you look to the person who is handed the hose, right? So for 2 years it was Mueller, and you're waiting for Mueller to get him, and you know, the indictment after indictment, and I think that is a lazy approach, right? Because the real scandal is that one of the country's two political parties said nothing today about the nature of the threats facing DA Alvin Bragg. Nothing. They're heinous. I didn't even read all of them that Lisa reported. They're heinous. The rot is that one of the two parties in the country doesn't care about the rule of law in America if it threatens Donald Trump.
No, I think that is the existential threat to the country, that we're normalizing this kind of behavior. I mean, this is not some politician saying that he's gotten threats and we wonder how serious it is. You have the New York City Police Department saying these are credible threats. You have jurors and the judge and the family. We're at a time we are normalizing a man convicted on 34 felonies is still within striking distance of winning for president of the United States. You have members of the Supreme Court that have openly broken ethical rules, and we are debating whether or not there should be an ethics standard. I mean, we've never been where we are now as a country. Yeah. And I really think we need to bear down, because people need to really actively bring back the boundaries of behavior in this country. It's beyond politics now.
Yeah, but I mean, Rev, what does that look like? I think the most sort of, when I try to explain it to people who are just starting to pay attention, right, we're heading into general election, I say, listen, there is a two-tiered system of justice, but it's the other direction. I mean, Trump was, a federal judge in California said Trump more likely than not committed felonies 3 years ago. I mean, there's nobody else who would have more likely than not committed felonies and still be walking around without facing any legal consequences for those crimes. He was talking about the January 6th insurrection.
Not only not facing any consequences, getting public support. Look at where he is in the polls. And he's able to get every Republican in the House of Representatives and the Senate to stand with him. This is absolutely unthinkable, unimaginable, but it's real. And we need to talk to people like it's real, and we need to behave like it's real. I don't think people understand the gravity of how far this has gone.
You know, Andrew Weissmann, I ask almost every day, where are the generals? You can't say the same thing of rule of law folks. I mean, people like yourself and Mary McCord and former Attorney General Eric Holder, they're out there. They're out there. They're warning people. Former Attorney General Eric Holder said on the show on Wednesday, people should focus on the fear that we should all feel if Trump does what he put on a website and promised he would do in Project 2025, which is to turn DOJ into a weapon to use against his perceived political enemies. He got pretty far in his first term without really understanding how to pull the levers. I mean, Durham had just about everybody under the sun that Trump rage tweeted about in for scrutiny and questions. I mean, for different reasons. Comey faced scrutiny, McCabe faced scrutiny. I mean, you know, Trump made some progress without really understanding how it works. What is the conversation we should be having about what he would do with the second term?
Well, you know, I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of what would happen in the second term. But the one thing I would caution is that I don't think one needs to even engage in speculation about what he would do and allow Trump to say, oh, you know, those are flights of fancy. You can look at what he is saying and doing now, and you can look at what he said and did when he was president. In other words, you don't have to project very far. Yes, it's clear it's going to be worse because he's now going to be ready and prepared, whereas last time he wasn't. And you can be sure that people who were somewhat of a guardrail and cautioned and did things to sort of blow the whistle, including, you know, the Attorney General Sessions nobody like that will be appointed again because he was fired because he understood the independence of the Department of Justice. Even if you disagree with him politically, he was gotten rid of because he was a form of a check on the President of the United States. But you can really look at what is going on right now, which is just pure authoritarianism. And so you don't have to speculate and go further. But just on the good news part, because I know the legal system has not done all that well, but let's just remember that on July 11th, that this is the rule of law in action. We had a very fulsome trial with eminent defense counsel. We had a wonderful judge overseeing a case, and a jury citizens found beyond a reasonable doubt that crimes were committed, 34 of them, and Donald Trump, regardless of his position in office, was found guilty, and he will be sentenced. And that, to me, is a positive sign for this country. As much as it will be divisive and will be used as a springboard in the campaign, it is, you know, I think it is something that brings us a step closer to sort of what we are founded on and to holding everyone to account if they commit a crime. And so it is useful while we're talking about sort of the sort of the yin to think about the yang of where we are, because there's such polar opposites. It is important to remember this other aspect that is what we stand for.